It's great to have you with us today. I hope you're all comfortable and you've got a cuppa handy and you're ready to hear and engage from some amazing speakers on topics that are very relevant to our community. So our annual conference has evolved significantly since our first one took place in 2009. And those of us that have been around for the last 15 years can vouch for that. And as many of you know, the purpose is to take time and space to come together, think strategically about our sector, improve our knowledge and learn from experts and from each other. And today we'll focus on being commercial. We'll hear about how the public sector is facing a raft of challenges affecting the delivery of public services. And as we all know, the public sector is having to make significant savings to balance their budgets, and increasingly difficult decisions need to be made about spending priorities. So the conference will consider how we can find, adapt and implement solutions together in these challenging financial times. And of course, we couldn't have the conference without talking about the environment. Working towards net zero emissions by 2045 is hugely important to all of us. So we'll hear some reflections from the electrical vehicle charging sector. And as well as net zero, throughout the day, you'll be hearing about why championing, I can't say that, competition matters, the importance of digital interoperability of local public services, supporting new innovations and how we can help you drive value through things like payment acceptance and open banking, and the awareness of risk appetite in public sector spending. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank you for your support, input and knowledge. And I'd also like to thank all the speakers who've taken time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. And as always, we welcome your thoughts. The hashtag for the event on Twitter is hashtag SXL Conference. And please join the discussion and I look forward to reading your comments. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Kenneth, Head of Devolved Nations from the Competitions and Markets Authority, the CMA, and Brendan McGinty. The CMA's presence in Scotland has grown over the last 5 years, with almost 100 people now based in their Edinburgh office. And I look forward to hearing about their role, remit, and why championing competition and the needs of Scottish consumers matters. So over to you, Kenneth.
And thanks very much, Julie, and good morning, everyone. And thanks very much for the opportunity to come along today and present to you. As Julie introduced, I'm Kenneth. I'm Head of Devolved Nations at the CMA, and I'm joined today by Brendan McGinty, who's my colleague in Scotland and our nation representative here. So I'll just let Brendan introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. As Kenneth says, I'm Brendan McGinty. I'm the Scotland representative at the CMA. Based in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh. So I'm one of 3 representatives for each of the devolved nations. I'm not long in the job. I think ordinarily I'd be taking a bit more of a role in this presentation. Kenneth's kindly agreed to lead on today, but going forward, I would guess I'll be the point of contact really for most of the CMA's external facing matters like this one. So if anybody needs to contact the CMA, even if there's anything arising, I suppose, from this presentation, I'm your go-to person, and obviously happy to hear from as many of you as possible. And obviously great to be here and looking forward to hearing more about Scotland XL. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Brendan. And as Brendan said, we're quite a new team in Scotland. Our colleague Caroline, who you may have met before, unfortunately isn't around this week, otherwise would have been on the presentation today. So it might be that when it gets to the Q&A at the end, we might be both a bit too fresh to be able to give you all the answers, but please do come forward with any questions you've got, and we'll be delighted to take anything away and get back to you by email. And our contact details will be at the end of the presentation. So I suppose what I'm looking to do today is just go through the role and the remit of the CMA, and as Julie said, why championing competition and the needs of Scottish consumers matters. I'll introduce the CMA, who we are, and give an overview of the powers and tools that we've got and how we use them to benefit consumers. And I'll also give an overview of how the CMA works with public bodies and policymakers, and I suppose our offer to you as this community in Scotland. But first, I'm just going to load up this Mentimeter here, which you may have used before. And if you're able to just scan the QR code there and answer the 2 questions that come up on the screen, and that just helps us judge where the audience is at, and we'll ask the same questions at the end of the presentation. So if you just scan the QR code that's come up on the screen, you should be able to answer the questions in front of you. And we should really have some hold music for while we're waiting for the responses to flood in here, but unfortunately we've not got anything that advanced. So I can see 75 people have responded and the numbers creeping up. Well, hopefully we'll improve on those numbers and you'll come away with a stronger understanding of what we can do to help your organisation and a stronger awareness of the work that the CMA does. That's really helpful in giving us a bit of a feel for who's in the room and your understanding this morning. I'll move back to the slides now, but thanks very much for doing that. And there'll be an opportunity to carry that, to answer those questions again at the end of the presentation. And hopefully we'll see those numbers dial up a little bit. So the CMA is an independent, non-ministerial UK government department. So we've got an independent chief executive board, and we're the UK's lead competition and consumer authority, and we help people, businesses and the whole UK economy by promoting competitive markets and tackling unfair behaviour across the 4 nations. And we're committed to maintaining a strong understanding of the issues affecting consumers and businesses across the whole of the UK. And we do that by working closely with officials across national and local government, as well as businesses, legal bodies and the voluntary sector too. And as Julie said, we've got a substantial office and workforce based in Edinburgh, but we've also got offices in Belfast, Cardiff, a new one in Darlington and Manchester, as well as in Canary Wharf in London. And we've got just up, I think we've now hit the 100 mark as Brendan has joined of staff working in Edinburgh. And we're planning on it continuing to increase our presence here in the years ahead. And staff in our Edinburgh office cover basically all the main functions of the CMA. So we've got lawyers, economists across multiple work streams, consumer market colleagues, and we've got a dedicated team of people who I lead, who work across the Scottish policy landscape and hold relationships with our stakeholders in Scotland. And that just makes sure that the issues that matter most to people in Scotland are really considered fully in the work of the CMA. So in 2023, we published a new annual plan, and we lay that in the parliaments, all 4 parliaments of the UK, and we've updated that in 2024. And the plan, I think, reflects the importance of, I suppose, setting out a strategy that's evidence-based, and it takes account of different changes in the external environment in which we operate. So some of the changes that includes are, the impact of economic challenges on individuals and livelihoods, the effects of rapid technological change on the way that business is done, and sustainability. And I suppose those are themes that, as Julie's outlined, you'll be covering in your conference over the course of the next 2 days. And each year our annual plan is approved at the highest level of our organisation by our independent board. And we take very seriously our requirement to consult on our draft plan, and we held an event in Edinburgh in January, hosted by our Chief Executive, where a number of different stakeholders across competition and consumer landscape spoke to us about the priorities for them and for people and businesses in Scotland. And we've really increased our engagement with stakeholders across the UK. So from everyone from startups, consumer groups, and universities, and our board meets across the 4 nations of the UK every year. And they're in Edinburgh actually in a few weeks' time, where we'll be holding roundtable events on how the CMA can best support SMEs. And our ambition as an organisation is to promote an environment where people can be confident they're getting great choices and fair deals, no matter where they live in the UK. And we work hard to ensure competitive, fair dealing businesses can innovate and thrive, and that supports the whole of the UK to grow productively and also grow sustainably. So in order to ensure that we can then deliver against this strategy and on our ambitions, we've got a number of tools at our disposal. And they're split into 2 main parts. The first half where we take direct action, and the second where we take an approach of influencing and advising. So to take the first half of those, we've got a number of tools to take direct action. The first of which is on competition law enforcement. This includes powers to fine, issue director disqualifications where we see anti-competitive agreements like cartel behaviour or bid rigging or price fixing. And we've got the power to block or change mergers. And you may well have seen some of the high-profile cases we've been involved in the past couple of years. We've got consumer enforcement powers where we look at the practices that businesses engaging when dealing with consumers. And the UK Parliament's about to approve the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill. It's just progressing through its final stages in Westminster, and that will see our consumer enforcement powers change quite significantly, including the ability to fine businesses without first having to take them to court. We can conduct market studies and investigations, and I'm going to talk through a couple of examples in a few minutes. But generally the output from this work can be recommendations to governments across the UK, or actually voluntary undertakings from companies in the case of market investigations, as well as hard outcomes in the shape of legally binding orders. And as I mentioned, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill has seen the establishment of an internal unit called the Digital Markets Unit, which will ensure that the rules of the game are clear and upfront, and will work with powerful tech firms to ensure that they comply with them. And the DMU currently exists in shadow form in the CMA, but once it passes, it will become a formal part of the CMA's toolkit. And then in recent years, and certainly post-Brexit, we've taken on a number of new functions. The UK Internal Market Act created an Office for the Internal Market, which sits within the CMA, and that carries out a set of independent advisory, monitoring and reporting functions to support the development and effective operation of the UK internal market on an ongoing basis. And the OIM will analyse the health of the UK internal market, and it reports to UK and the devolved parliaments. We've also got the Subsidy Advice Unit, and that provides independent, non-binding advice on the assessments of high-value subsidies that are referred by public authorities, and that takes into account any effect that they might have on competition or investment in the UK. And then we've got a microeconomics unit, which was set up in 2022, and that conducts economic research focusing on competition, innovation and productivity to support growth in the UK economy. And it just published a report on the labour market of the UK in the last few weeks. I suppose the role of the unit is to provide expertise and ensure the CMA and government remains informed of emerging economic issues. And that was set up after the UK government commissioned a report on competition policy in 2021. And then Brendan and I sit in the Advocacy Policy International team. And we have a number of different tools that we work with, and I'll come on to them shortly. But first, I want to just share some of our recent work and how the tools have benefited consumers, both in Scotland and across the UK. So as I mentioned earlier, our aim is to ensure that people can be confident that they're getting great choices and fair deals, no matter where they live in the UK, and that competitive, fair dealing businesses can innovate and thrive. It supports the whole of the UK economy. I suppose no better example than that than talking about cost of living pressures. So I'll give you a couple of examples about interventions that we've made in the last year or so. So one of them is in terms of road fuel. And we're continuing to monitor this as an issue. So we carried out a market study into road fuel in July last year, and we found that there's been significant increases in the annual margins for both petrol and diesel since 2019. So we analysed this over 21 areas across Britain, which were more expensive than the national average, and 5 of those were in Scotland, and one of them was in the west, and it was Inverclyde. So we found that supermarkets are generally the cheapest places to buy fuel. We found in 2022, Asda and Morrisons each made the decision to target higher margins. Asda's margin target 2023 was more than 3 times what it had been in 2019. Morrisons doubled its margins in the same period, and other retailers like Sainsbury's and Tesco didn't respond in the way that you'd expect in a competitive market and instead increased their prices in line with those changes. So taken together, that indicates that competition's weakened and reinforces the need for action. So we've made recommendations to the UK government to set up a new monitoring body to scrutinise prices and margins on an ongoing basis, holding the industry to account and creating an open data scheme so that people can access live pump prices. And we're pleased that those recommendations have been immediately accepted in full by the UK government, and that a new open data tool for road fuel is going to be rolled out. And we hope that that's going to increase competition in that market. We also commenced quite a big piece of work looking at the groceries sector. So we carried out an assessment of retail competition. And during our work, we assessed how retail competition is working in the grocery sector, particularly between supermarkets. And we looked at Asda, Morrisons, Sainsbury's and Tesco and other supermarkets, as well as discounters, including Aldi and Lidl, and looking at the effectiveness of retail competition across the market. And the stage of our review has focused on the extent to which rivalry between retailers ensures that they can keep the prices as low as possible. And although food price inflation is at historically high levels, evidence collected today indicates that competition issues haven't been driving this. So we saw that operating profits fell significantly in 2022 by about 40% compared to the previous year, where they fell for just about by 3%. So we've seen that retailers' costs are increasing far faster than the revenues, indicating that rising costs haven't actually been passed on in full to consumers. And consumers are shopping around to get the best deals, and lowest price retailers, including Aldi and Lidl, have gained share from their competitors, suggesting that retailers are restricted in their ability to raise prices without losing business. But not everyone's able to fully benefit from strong competition, particularly those who can't travel to large stores or shop online and therefore might rely on higher priced convenience stores. And we're about to move into the next stage of our work to look at 10 product categories, including milk, bread, infant formula, to gain a deeper understanding of competition price dynamics. One area that we're looking at in particular is on unit pricing. And we find that provides really helpful information to ensure that people can compare prices effectively. And we found that there's some concerns about the consistency of unit pricing, how transparent it is, how legible it is on shelf edge, and the promotions that retailers are offering. And we're not finding that retailers are actually displaying unit pricing for products on promotion. And earlier this month, and working with Trading Standards Scotland, we've published some new compliance materials to help independent retailers understanding what they need to do to comply with competition law. And something that piqued my interest before I joined the CMA was the review that we've carried out looking at consumer experiences with the vet sector. So we explored how the veterinary market, which is worth over £2 billion in the UK, was working for pet owners and if they were receiving the information that they need. And actually, the ownership of vet practices has changed really significantly in recent years. So in 2013, about 89% of practices, veterinary practices, were independent in the UK. But in 2021, that's fallen to just 45%. So in some cases, a single company may own hundreds of practices, but actually it's not clear to people whether or not their vet is part of a large group. So quite unprecedented, we received 56,000 responses from the public and the vet industry. And we've got a number of concerns, including that consumers might not be given enough information to make them choose the best vet practice or the right treatment, that they're very concentrated local markets where there's been sector consolidation, which means that there's quite weak competition in some areas of the UK. that large corporate groups have incentives to act in ways which reduce choice and that weakens competition, and that pet owners might be overpaying for medicines or prescriptions. And we've also found that the regulatory framework may be outdated and no longer fit for purpose. And we're about to publish an update on our work in this sector in the next week or so. And finally, on house building, we completed a market study into the house building sector earlier this year. I suppose, house building's been at some form part of the forefront of UK policymaking since the end of the Second World War, and has always been closely scrutinised in numerous research papers by academics. But government policy, both at UK and devolved level, has been an important driver of adequate housing, economic environment, demographics. It affects quite a number of things. Other factors have actually had quite a large influence on market outcomes. But we found that house building across the whole of the UK has often been at below government target level and assessment of need, and this under-delivery has contributed to increasing pressures on affordability. So our report made a number of recommendations for the Scottish and UK governments to reform the planning system, and we've had a number of productive conversations with the Scottish Government as it's considering its policies in this area. And just very briefly, I've also highlighted sustainability here. We've made a public commitment to promoting environmental sustainability as the economies of the UK transition to net zero, and we've got some formal guidance on our website developed by a sustainability task force which we lead. And I know that at the start of the session today, there was a discussion about EV charging points, and we've made some recommendations on electric vehicle charging, some consumer guidance on green heating and insulation, and some work that we've done on misleading green claims. And we've secured commitments from Georgia, Asda, Boohoo and ASOS about the claims that they make about the sustainability of their clothes. So that's quite an overview of some of the different projects, but hopefully brings to life how we support the UK economy and the interventions that we sometimes make. And I'll just talk through how we work with public bodies and we work with policymakers. So we've got a function of making proposals and giving advice and information that's described in legislation as on matters relating to any functions to the Minister of the Crown or any public authority. So this includes devolved governments. And this is what we call our advocacy work. And essentially, advocacy is the term used by competition and consumer authorities to capture interactions with government and public bodies and to preserve and promote competition in markets that function in the consumer interest. So our advocacy work is complementary to the CMA's wider case and project work. And pursuing private restrictions of competition and consumer law needs to sit alongside engaging with government and public authorities to remove or prevent public restrictions on distortions. So this can come from many of the ways that governments affect markets, so purchasers, suppliers, subsidisers, taxes, or regulators. And the CMA's remit is economy-wide, so we can advocate on issues across the whole of the economy. And this is some of the tools that we use for advocacy. So our aim is to ensure that the effects of policies on markets and competitive outcomes are always taken into account. And we're not trying to stop policies that stop all policies that adversely affect competition. And the government has multiple policies at play at any one time, and it's right that they, as the elected representatives, trade them off against each other. But early consideration of competitive issues can actually improve policy making to the benefit of consumers and prevent problems arriving in the first place. So we aim to be independent and trusted advisors to government. So we work with central, devolved and local governments and also public bodies to identify legislation, policies and practice that are likely to affect markets and constructively challenge when restrictions could create distortions. And we highlight specific concerns and make suggestions for alternative approaches which may achieve the end policy goal. And we aim to build competition and market expertise within government. And we mean all governments across the UK, local authorities and public bodies. So this isn't a sort of perfect linear relationship, but the slide shows some of the tools we use, including informal correspondence, so meeting with government and interested parties, like trade associations or businesses and public bodies. We second staff into other government departments, and they join the CMA or vice versa. We second into those departments, and we have substantive input from the CMA to government departments. We provide training to all levels of government on how to consider competition when considering policies and interventions. And this aims to help develop government officials' skills in identifying anti-competitive behaviour. We publish open letters to different sectors where we have concerns. So, for instance, when it was COVID-19, we issued an open letter to food and drink and pharmaceutical industries, warning firms that they shouldn't capitalise on the current situation by charging unjustifiably high prices for essential goods. And we also issued a joint statement with different trade organisations on price gouging. And we regularly issue government policy developments for issues that might have an interest in our work. And we formally respond to consultations or calls for views that gives the CMA view on government plans and legislations. And this is just another opportunity for the CMA to ensure that competition and consumer issues are considered as government develops new policies or initiatives. We recently put in a submission to Scottish Government's draft energy strategy and just transition plan and its consultation on guidance for funeral directors, which followed on from the work that we've done in 2020 on funeral markets. We've got our chairman and chief exec who regularly write op-eds and make interventions in the media and on social media. And we also produce reports on the outcomes of case studies and markets. And recent examples of this include our market study into the care sector, which led to specific recommendations to the Scottish Government on care homes. And we also regularly write to ministers to update them on our work and make recommendations. We also provide briefings to parliamentarians when it comes to debates in Parliament, which are relevant to our work. And we also publish a quarterly newsletter for stakeholders, which provides a regular update on our work. And there's an email address at the end of the presentation, so do email us if you're interested in receiving the next edition of our newsletter next month. I suppose just before I finish, I want to just flag some of the free resources that we have that can support you in your work. So the first is to support procurement professionals to spot bid rigging practices. So we've got a free e-learning toolkit for procurement professionals, and we offer bespoke training sessions for free, either in person or online for you and your colleagues. And some of you may have heard our colleagues give a presentation on this last year. So again, do contact us at the end of the presentation if this is something that's of interest to you. Secondly, if you're a policymaker, we offer free competition assessment guideline trainings. This is aimed to help you when you're reviewing or developing policies that may affect competition, including as part of regulatory appraisal in central government and a set out and impact assessments. And whether or not you work in a government department or other public agencies, they're actually a really helpful way to think about competition and consumers. And although you may have many priorities to consider alongside competition, applying these guidelines can help you identify and understand the implications of design choices on competition and consumers. So do let us know if any of these are of interest to you. So I've spoken quite a bit there and hopefully have brought up your understanding of the work that we do. So I'm just going to run those slides again and do scan that QR code and let us know if you think I've been able to start to increase your awareness of what we do and how we can help the organisation. Well, those numbers are looking a bit healthier. So I'm relieved that some of the information got through there, and that only being a few weeks in the door, I was able to explain some of the work that we do. And you'll appreciate that at the CMA there's just a great breadth of work, but we've got a number of ways of keeping stakeholders informed as I talk through. So please do let us know if there's anything in that presentation that's of interest to you, and that we can help you with. And do check out our website that's really clear for different people that have got an interest in our work.
Thanks, Kenneth. That was really, really informative. Thanks very much. I enjoyed that. I've got lots of questions. There was one question came up in the chat, but Sarah's already answered it, which was around how can we look at the newsletter and the training and all that. And she's put in the link to your website. So what I'll do is I'll kind of open it up to questions now. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand or pop it in the chat. While we're waiting, Kenneth, and I know I'm not trying to put you in the spot because I know you said that you're not long in the post, but I was quite fascinated actually by some of the areas that you cover. We're one of the biggest, Scotland Excel is one of the biggest public sector food buyers in Scotland. So food pricing is very close to our heart. And one of the challenges that we face is getting the right data to make decisions and to inform strategies. And I was really curious as to how the CMA gets the information that it needs to sort of give us this insight.
So it's a great question. We've got a number of statutory powers in terms of being able to request information from businesses that informed that market study we did on food. But we've also got a team of economists that and this economics unit we've got in the north of England that I suppose is able to apply very detailed research. So it's a combination of when there's specific studies, we've got the ability to go in and really conduct quite an in-depth, investigation of the market. Generally we've got really good buy-in from different sectors and an interest to improve the policy there. So I can definitely send across a link to the work that we've done on food. And I think there probably is a real relevance to the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. And interestingly, we've just launched a tender for our new build housing framework as well. So that was of interest too, but maybe a separate discussion with yourself and Brendan. So a couple of questions. We've got one in the chat from Prentice Baines. How does the CMA decide which markets to regulate? For example, would the CMA intervene in the energy markets as this is regulated by Ofgem?
Yeah, so that's the question that I asked when I joined as well, to understand a little bit more about how we do it. I point in the direction of the annual plan that we publish on our website. It's written actually really clearly for I suppose people that are completely outside the CMA and the work that we do, and it explains a little bit more about how we govern ourselves and the decisions that we take. But the regulators in the UK actually have got quite a clear process by which they ensure that there's sort of concurrency between different regimes, and that I suppose that we're sharing issues, but also being clear on how different regulators make those decisions independently. I suppose it's a combination of us just monitoring the external environment and judging that against our strategy, and some very rapid studies that we've done in the markets where there's been particular issues, particularly during COVID and the cost of living crisis, and on road fuels when that issue became a priority. We're independent of government, but we do get a steer from government if there are particular issues of concern to consumers and competition policy in the UK. And we do take submissions on a web form as well. So if there are particular issues or people want to just tip off the CMA with issues like anti-competitive behaviour, it's very accessible to the public and interested parties on how they can contact us.
Okay. Thanks, Kenneth. That was a really good question and a great answer. Stephen Brannigan wants to come in with a question.
Thanks, Julie. Kenneth and Brendan, you're new to the organisation, but you've depressed me today, right? So I've got to drive up to the vet today and pick up some shopping, and knowing that everybody's profiteering from my day is a bit sad. Kind of linked to Prentice's question and what Julie talked about there. Really good presentation, really interesting stuff you guys do. Interested in the input side. And you may do this already, I'm just not aware, and if not, it may be an opportunity for Brendan, but you've got 150 plus people on the call just now representing Scottish public sector, predominantly procurement. 16 billion pounds worth of spend. Do you have a mechanism where you routinely meet? I know in your chart you said informal meetings, but do you routinely meet with the public sector to talk about any indicators? So I know like the Bank of England do an agent model, probably maybe the equivalent of Brendan's role, where 6 monthly meetings and getting some intelligence from the guys in the trench. And as I say, 150 people in here will have some hints and some feelings about what they're seeing in that significant spend. So is that something you do or would be interested in doing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think we've you appreciate from the presentation the breadth of work that we do means that there's a constraint to how much of that engagement we do. But as Brendan described at the start, that's what we've got this presence in the nations for, is to make sure that we're speaking to the right people and that people know that they can access the CMA and input to our work. Sort of at the very basic level, I suppose the annual plan that we put out for consultation every year is a great way to be involved. We'll make, when we send out that newsletter, if people subscribe to it, then there'll be a link to input there. So I suppose that's the very first way to input to the workflow that we've got at the CMA. But, I suppose, I'll let Brendan speak for himself if he wants to add anything to this. But you've got our details. That's scotland@cma.gov.uk email address. We're here to be accessible. We want to be out there and speaking to people and those that are interested in our work. And we're really pleased to be here today and be able to present our work to you. So I think that sounds like a great proposal to have a bit more of a conversation and a structured one on the back of this presentation today. So very happy to pick up with you at Scotland Excel, and it was great. And we've got that link into your network as well. Brendan, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I suppose all I would say is that there is one thing that I've learned from the very short time that I've been in the job, is that there is enormous interest in the organisation from across Scottish society. And as Kenneth outlined, we do loads of external engagement, but we're part of the organisation's sort of offering is to be as open and accessible and listening to people as possible. So I think it sounds like a great idea. Be really open to it if there was interest, and how it's structured, how often we do it can be something that we thrash out. But that's sort of my job, and happy to hear, particularly where there's interest and people who think that they can make sort of constructive input into the work we do. We are very, very happy to be accessible and open to that.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thanks for the question, Stephen, and the answer from Kenneth and Brendan. We do have another question in the chat related to electrical vehicle charging, which is something in local government we're grappling with in terms of how we procure it, what that model looks like. Maureen Buchanan is asking, is there any information on this which you could share? Because the city region contracts will be being put in place in the near future. So I'll hand that over to you, Kenneth, if that's okay.
Yeah, we're getting slightly into the reeds of CMA work that I'm less familiar with. But what I can do is pop the, rather than give a politician's answer, I'll pop the link into the market study that we carried out there. And if there's things that stand out, from issues of work like that are of particular interest to you, that you've got questions on, they generally contact details when it comes to market study. But again, do just email in to Brendan and me, and we're very happy to put you in touch with colleagues that have worked more closely on those issues.
Great, I think that's really helpful. And Hugh, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Julie, and thanks, Kenneth. That was really interesting. It's a slight extension to some of the previous discussions that we've just had, and it's really around, you mentioned the breadth of your work plan, and we've got a pretty broad work plan as well. But our work plan's reflective of the priorities of the local government sector. So perhaps there's an opportunity to identify, through our forward plan, areas of overlap between our priorities and those that you are potentially working on, or have potentially identified that there's either a gap or an opportunity in the market. So maybe that's something we could think about collectively going forward, pretty much in the way that we had dialogue about the care sector over the course of the last 18 months or so. So that's maybe just something to think about. Yeah,
I think that's great. And let's keep the conversation going, but similarly, the sort of the general annual plan process for the CMA is that there's a longer term strategic plan. I think it's 3 years that we've set, which actually is quite helpful in terms of considering, what we're doing on a year by year basis. So we've got that longer term strategy, and you've picked up that the CMA has grown in terms of power and remit in the digital markets bill that's going through the UK Parliament at the moment, and we'll continue that. So as the organisation's growing, then I think that helps us get a bit clearer picture about the future direction that we'll be taking, and with a clear view in which markets we've got particular interest in or particular consumer issues. And that's obviously coupled by the fact that there have been these moments of increased cost of living and the inflation hike, as well as COVID and Brexit in the past few years that have just naturally disrupted what would be hopefully quite a set work plan.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. So doesn't look like we have any other questions. Last call in case anyone's got a last minute question when we've got Kenneth and Brendan here. No, I think that's us. So all that it means for me is to say a huge thank you to Kenneth Watt and Brendan McGinty for joining us from the CMA. And I think based on the conversations, there is more work we can do together and more engagement that we can have. And I really look forward to that. So thank you to you guys. And just to let you know that our next session is technology, the need for interoperability and thinking differently as a wider public sector. And that's with Martin Wallace at the Digital Office. And we'll be starting at 10:30. So see you then. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.